What if the next world war didn't begin with a declaration, but with a silent cyber attack that shut down a power grid in the middle of the night? What if the first sign of war wasn't soldiers crossing borders, but satellites disappearing from the sky, stock markets crashing in seconds, and entire cities losing communication? And what if the world's most powerful nation realized the truth too late? The Third World War had already begun. The world had lived for decades under an uneasy peace. After the end of the Cold War, many people believed humanity had entered a new era. Global trade, connected continents, technology linked billions of people, and international organizations promised diplomacy instead of destruction. But beneath the surface, the balance of power was slowly shifting. New rivalries were emerging, old alliances were being tested, and the competition between global superpowers was becoming more intense every year. In the United States, many policymakers believed the biggest challenge of the 21st century would be the growing power of rivals like China and Russia. Military analysts warned that future wars would look very different from those of the past. They wouldn't always begin with tanks rolling across borders. They might begin with cyber attacks, artificial intelligence, economic warfare, information manipulation, and the battlefield could extend far beyond traditional front lines. The early warning signs appeared gradually. First came the cyber incidents. Power grids in several countries experienced mysterious failures. Financial institutions reported sophisticated hacking attempts. Government agencies discovered their networks had been quietly infiltrated for years. Each event alone seemed manageable, but together they painted a troubling picture. Someone was preparing for a different kind of war. At the same time, tensions in several regions of the world were rising. In Eastern Europe, military activity increased dramatically. Troop movements near contested borders triggered international concern. In the Pacific, naval patrols and military exercises became more frequent as rival fleets maneuvered through contested waters. In the Middle East, long-standing conflicts threatened to pull larger powers into direct confrontation. For years, diplomats tried to contain the pressure. Summits were held, warnings were issued, sanctions were imposed, but geopolitical competition continued to intensify. Inside the Pentagon, strategic planners were studying scenarios that once seemed unthinkable. What if multiple crises erupted at the same time? What if cyber attacks disabled communication networks? What if satellites that guided global navigation and military systems were suddenly destroyed? In modern warfare, space had become as important as land, sea, and air, and many countries are developing weapons designed specifically to target satellites. One morning, the first real shock came. A communications satellite suddenly went offline, then another, and another. Within hours, several satellites belonging to different countries stopped responding. Navigation systems began to fail. Air traffic controllers struggled to maintain contact with aircraft. Shipping companies lost tracking signals across major trade routes. Governments quickly realized something alarming. This wasn't a technical malfunction. Someone was deliberately attacking the infrastructure that modern civilization depended on. At first, no nation claimed responsibility, but intelligence agencies began to suspect that advanced anti-satellite weapons had been used. The loss of satellites created chaos. Financial markets reacted immediately. Global stock exchanges plunged as uncertainty spread across the world economy. Without reliable satellite communication, military coordination became more difficult, and in the confusion, another attack occurred. This time, it was cyber.
Major banking systems in multiple countries suddenly froze. Customers couldn't access accounts. Payment systems stopped working. Businesses struggled to process transactions. Within hours, panic began spreading through major cities. People rushed to withdraw cash. Stores saw long lines forming. Rumors moved faster than facts. Governments tried to reassure the public, but behind closed doors, military leaders were preparing for something far worse. Intelligence reports suggested that several countries had quietly moved forces into strategic positions. Submarines had left their ports. Missile defense systems were being activated. Air forces were placed on high alert. The world was entering a dangerous phase where a single mistake could trigger an uncontrollable chain reaction. In Washington, emergency meetings took place throughout the night. Military commanders presented options. Diplomats warned that escalation could spiral out of control, and intelligence officials admitted something deeply unsettling. The attacks had been designed to create confusion and delay. They were not random acts, they were part of a carefully planned strategy, a strategy designed to weaken global coordination before open conflict began. Meanwhile, tensions in the Pacific suddenly escalated. A naval incident occurred in contested waters. Two warships from rival nations collided during a tense standoff. Each side blamed the other. Within hours, military aircraft were scrambling across the region. Missile systems were activated. For the first time in decades, the possibility of direct confrontation between major powers seemed real. Global news networks broadcast the images non-stop. People around the world watched anxiously. Markets continued to fall. Airlines canceled flights. Shipping routes were disrupted. Supply chains that connected the global economy began to break down. Then came the moment that historians would later describe as the point of no return. A missile was launched. At first, early warning systems detected the launch, but couldn't determine its target. Defense networks immediately went into full alert. Military commanders had only minutes to assess the situation. Was it a test, a limited strike, or the beginning of a much larger attack? For several tense minutes, the world held its breath. Then the missile impacted in the ocean. It had been a demonstration, a message, a warning. But the message was clear. The era of indirect competition was ending. The world was now dangerously close to open conflict between nuclear-armed powers. Governments across the globe rushed to respond. Diplomatic hotlines were activated. Emergency meetings at the United Nations took place. Leaders attempted to prevent escalation, but the situation was unstable. Trust between major powers had eroded for years, and now every move was interpreted as a potential threat. Military forces continued to mobilize. Cyber attacks intensified. Critical infrastructure faced repeated disruptions. Energy networks were targeted. Communication systems experienced interference. Transportation networks struggled to operate. The modern world, built on digital systems and global interconnection, proved surprisingly fragile. Citizens in many countries began to prepare for the worst. Emergency supplies sold out quickly. Fuel shortages appeared. Governments urged calm, but uncertainty remained everywhere. Then something unexpected happened. Amid the chaos and rising tensions, leaders from several nations began quietly pushing for a different approach. They understood something critical. A full-scale global war in the 21st century would not resemble the conflicts of the past. The destructive power of modern weapons, especially nuclear arsenals, meant that no nation could truly win. Victory in such a war might simply mean surviving a catastrophe that destroyed civilization itself. And so, behind the scenes, intense diplomatic efforts began. Secret negotiations took place. Military communication channels reopened. Warnings were exchanged, but also proposals for de-escalation. The world stood at a crossroads. One path led to global war. The other required restraint, cooperation, and trust that had been slowly eroding for decades. For several days, the situation remained uncertain, but gradually, signs of stabilization began to appear. Naval forces stepped back from contested zones. Cyber attacks slowed. Emergency diplomatic summits were scheduled. The crisis had not completely ended, but the immediate risk of global war began to decline. Historians would later describe that period as one of the most dangerous moments of the 21st century.